discovery that I stumbled on was that Marilyn Monroe herself, Marilyn Monroe was a character that she played, and that the image that you're most familiar with, there was a person underneath there, and that was the first big discovery that that was carefully honed, but it was artifice, and it was honed to where you couldn't tell that it was artifice. It felt so real, but it was something that she'd studied and perfected and crafted. So once I discovered that was a layer, and finding out what that layer was, and then getting underneath it. So it was a long and ungainly process.
I mean, in a way, it seems it's almost like a multiple role, because you're playing someone who's playing a role who's playing a role. Did you think of it in those terms, almost like you were playing 3 characters instead of 1?
I don't know if we ever talked about it like that. Did we, Simon?
I think so, because we're talking about the private Marilyn, the public Marilyn, and then the Marilyn in The Prince and the Showgirl. So 3 Marilyns.
Yeah, I think we're talking. In some way, it's not. When you think of them separately, you want to think of them together because they need to adhere. So I know that there are sort of 3 different aspects, but I think maybe it's a little. I don't know how much it helps me to think of them as 3 sort of separate people because they are, of course, connected.
And can you talk a little bit about your scenes with Kenneth Branagh in the film, and how you guys developed the relationship of Monroe and Olivier, and did it, was there any effort to mirror, on the set of this movie, the relationship that they had on the set of The Prince and the Showgirl? Did you guys keep a distance from each other? What was that relationship like?
I think that the only distance that we might have kept was because we were both so absorbed in our process. We sat next to each other in the hair and makeup chair, and it was like Command Central number 1 and Command Central number 2. We both were kind of married to our computers, headphones in our ears, constantly watching, listening, absorbing, and then going out and doing. So the only kind of separation occurred as a part of trying to capture somebody who was, and that requires a certain amount of technical attention.
And Eddie, can you tell us a little bit about how you became involved with the project, and a little bit about Simon as a director of actors?
Well, I came across the project. I was actually in New York doing a play, and I was sent the script. I had studied art history at university, so I knew a bit about Kenneth Clark, who was Colin Clark's dad. So I'd heard about that sort of background, and so that kind of spiked my curiosity, I suppose. And then read the script and realised I had a weird amount in common with this guy, and got really engaged with it. And then so I just auditioned for Simon, and then Michelle was from Toronto, and went up there, and we had a screen test there, and then from then on it was the most wonderful ride, really. And Simon I'd known through socially through theatre in London, and it was the most wonderful experience. And I think I speak for Michelle here as well, but on this film, as you see, there is the most staggering group of British actors who were sort of idols of mine, and so certainly for me, every day it was like you were going to work and getting to share a scene with one of the great knights of the realm, or Dame Juliet, sure. And the reason so many extraordinary actors were working on this film was because they love working for Simon, and he has a wonderful facility with actors. So it was this whole idea that plays in the film of theatre and film intermingling. I think kind of worked quite well in that sense.
Questions? Yes, here.
Stunning. But I just want to say that up front. I was in class with Lee and Paula and Marilyn, and I must say that, Michelle, you just caught the private Marilyn that I knew outside of the image. But my question to Simon is, Paula, a cash cow, is sort of one of the lines that is in the film. Do you think that she was as bad as people say she was?
No, I don't actually. I think
Just repeat the question. Firstly, the gentleman who knew Marilyn Monroe says compliments Michelle on so precisely capturing what the private Marilyn really was like. And then for Simon, asks if he feels that Paula Strasberg was really as manipulative and self-interested as she comes across seeming to this viewer in the film.
No, I mean, I think, we had tremendous respect for all the characters in the film, and I think this is a very important moment in Marilyn's life. She'd moved to this city, to New York, and had, I think, fallen in love with the method. I mean, you know much more about that than I do, but I think it offered something to her in her process of becoming what she really wanted to be, a great actress. And along with Milton Green and the Strasbergs, and then, of course, newly married to the great Arthur Miller, it was a very significant moment in her life, and I think it was a big and bold decision for her to come to England. And I think Miller wrote that Paula was the fantasy mother in Marilyn's life, or something like that. Don't quote me. But she was the mother who would praise her in the way Marilyn's own mother hadn't done. And we were very, very keen not to parody, to mock the method, be an English production mocking of the method, because I take the method very seriously personally, and Marilyn certainly did. And it's a film about culture clashes on all kinds of levels. But we certainly didn't feel we were in the Olivier camp in Britain mocking the method, because I, as I say, greatly admire the Strasberg School of Acting. And as it must be said, did Zoe Wanamaker, who obviously has a tradition, she's American, and she took very seriously her own research in Paula and in the method.
Sir?
Well, I wanted to compliment you on your singing, and I wanted you to talk about what you did to train or prepare for that, because it's a hard thing to do, singing in general, and then to do someone else's voice. And then, Eddie, did you bring back any memories of your youth and your past and your naive moments in the theater?
The question for Michelle about preparing to sing in the film, particularly to sing in the voice of somebody else, and then for Eddie about whether the part brought back any memories of his own naive youth, which clearly is not that long ago.
Like I said, Marilyn Monroe was a creation, and that creation took a lot of personal work, and she also had, it was teachers, trainers were sort of more common then, professionals that would sort of help make these stars and help develop these talents. So I was, as she was, very lucky on this movie to be surrounded and supported by great people. So I had a wonderful man, David Crane, who worked with me every day for a couple of weeks and taught me about. I'm not a singer. I have not sang since I was 10 years old or something. So he taught me about breathing and about how to deliver emotion on lines instead of just a voice. So I had him, and then in my years I listened to. It comes up on my iPod all the time, all the Marilyn Monroe. I listened to her, and she was very influenced by Ella Fitzgerald, so I listened to a lot of that.
Yeah, did I relate? Yes, it did remind me a lot of my youth. There was one extraordinary moment where we were actually shooting at Eton College, and I was showing Marilyn Monroe. Colin was showing Marilyn Monroe around Eton College, and that was the school that I went to. And so we were doing this scene, and Harvey was there, and Michelle was there, and there were all these schoolboys were playing the parts, and my old head of drama was there, stood at the side, going, and there was a sort of wonderful moment, when we did that scene, walking through, and all the guys were just, and Michelle sort of spontaneously improvised a kiss on one of them, and the guy just went beetroot, and they would sort of take me aside, sort of, what's she like? She's lovely, she does. So there were wonderful moments. I mean, I think one of the great things with the whole production was the sense that we shot in the studio that the Prince and the Showgirl was shot in. Am I lying to say your dressing room?
My dressing room was Marilyn's actual dressing room when she was making Prince and the Showgirl.
So there were all these elements.
And Parkside House was playing Parkside House. So when Marilyn is sitting on those stairs, having looked at Miller's journal, Michelle sat on the very stairs that Marilyn Miller sat at. And one of the great moments for me was when Michelle did that wonderful dance from The Prince and the Showgirl. And we were actually seeing that on the stage, the very spot that I think was in 1956 that Marilyn actually danced in that very spot was incredibly moving and incredibly special.
You, ma'am? Yes.
I felt that the movie also trying to comment about the celebrity culture and the difference between the celebrity culture of today and in the 50s. And I want to ask Michelle about that, if maybe you can, what, in your eyes, what is the biggest difference between now and then, the young famous actors?
It's a question about the difference in celebrity culture today versus in the 1950s. The film seems to some extent to comment on that, and could Michelle say what she feels the biggest differences in celebrity culture today versus then?
The internet.
Can you elaborate?
It's just that it's just the acceleration and proliferation of information. It's always existed, and it just has more forms to take.
Yes, sir.
I have a question that's sort of following up on the preparation for the scenes. That first opening scene where you're doing the musical number, I kept thinking about what's called in the film the greatest hits past and final. Did you have help there? Was that all you?
It's a follow-up question about preparing for the musical numbers in the film.
Well, I think it was a little more. There's another question or something else, which I don't know.
It's the magic of cinema. That's all we can say.
Yes.
Could you talk a bit about the changes from the memoir to the film? For example, the character of Lucy. Was she an invention? Was she in the memoir?
Question about changes or additions to the film from the memoir. For instance, the Emma Watson character, was she created for the film, or was she there in the book?
There was a wardrobe girl that Colin dated, and which he refers to in the diary. So we really worked hard to be as faithful to Colin's version of events as we could be.
Jennifer.
As you say, the film. Well, first of all, the film is very moving, and I congratulate you all on making a marvelous piece of work. As you say, that there are so many levels of Marilyn in this, and it's really an investigation of her character and relationship to her profession in the world. And that's a very serious subject. And yet the film has a tone about it sometimes that kind of goes into almost a latter-day comedy of manners in the theater film industry. I wonder whether that is something that's in the diaries, and how much of that, why you chose to do it that way in the film.
The question is that even though the film deals with many serious things about Marilyn and her relationship to the world, it also has a light touch that it often feels a kind of comedy of manners set in the world of theater and film. And is this coming from the diaries, or is this something that you particularly chose to emphasize in the film version?
I can't be definitive about that. Just to say that I think we all took very seriously the tone of Colin Clark's diaries, and he was incredibly insightful in many ways and incredibly witty in many ways. And for me, I think particularly the complexity of Michelle's performance is extraordinary. There's some nuance, but there's no reason why that shouldn't sit amongst something that's comedic or lighter as well. And also, I personally find the pain of directing, as expressed by Olivia's performance, very funny and very sort of heartening at times.
In the back, sir.
First of all, congratulations to everyone who's doing this work. I was wondering, did you shoot much material that, for whatever reason, didn't make it into the final film?
A question about whether there was much material shot that did not make it in the final cut.
Really not too much. I mean, we only had a 7-week shoot, didn't we? So it's a miracle we got that much in, I think.
Yes?
I was interested in the Julia Ormond representation of Vivian Sir Larry, and I was wondering, is that the perception of the writer, or was that actor? Because she was very generous, Vivian Lee, in the film, but I don't know that at 43 she would be that generous and that hopeless.
The question about the depiction.
Well, I think that
Vivian Lee
theme that's in the film, that that even if you are the most beautiful woman in the world, when you're 43 in Hollywood, you feel on the edge and past it, and the pain of that, and that had Marilyn have lived, she may well have faced that sort of dilemma shortly down the line. I think that is very important to me, that Vivian brings that to it. And it was very complicated for Olivier and Vivian, because the film was based on a play in which Vivian had played Marilyn's part. So, it was a very tricky decision for him in many ways, casting Marilyn in his wife's part. And so that all of that complexity is bubbling beneath the surface.
And was he as irascible and as egotistic as he appears? I mean, from what you understand.
I don't know I would use those words, but most of this is we've taken from Colin's version of what happened. And it has to be said that Colin was a big supporter of Olivier, and we did meet Elaine, who was the continuity woman on the original film, who was again a great Olivier devotee, and she confirmed that all this stuff had gone on. And it was very moving meeting her, because she had been 30 in 1956, as had Marilyn. And you think of the fate of life, and one of those two women was going to live a few more years, and the other is still living in her 80s today.
We're just about out of time, but I do want to ask one thing in closing, Simon, which is that did Colin Clark ever have any other communication for the rest of his life with Marilyn? Did he ever write to her? Did he ever see her again? Is that known?
I don't believe so.
I want to thank everybody for being here this morning.